Hot off the press, fresh today, you heard it here first, folks. Harman Phoenix is now available in 120. And it's gorgeous. Here are some of the best landscape photos I have ever taken, captured on Phoenix 120. I'm in love, and I don't care who knows it. This is the first time that I have featured medium format photography on my channel, because I am super new to the format. I have been wanting to get into it for a long time, but TLRs look really intimidating, and so I was kind of waffling about it. But then I got a call from the folks over at Harman, and they asked me if I ever shot 120, because if so, they had a little something that they wanted to send to me. And that was the kick in the pants that I needed to go out and buy this beautiful piece of equipment. And you know what? It's not nearly as intimidating as I thought it would be. My first practice roll of expired Kodacolor went pretty well, and so I was able to load my second roll ever, a bright shiny new reel of Harman Phoenix, with confidence. This was one of 7 test rolls sent to me by the Harman team. They also sent me some pins, so now all of my bags have Harman pins on them. And they sent me some stickers, so now all of my items have Harman Phoenix stickers on them. And they sent me some rolls of the 35mm version. So between the test rolls and the 35mm rolls, I've pretty much just been shooting Harman Phoenix for the last month and a half. So you're gonna see a lot of 35mm shots in this video as well. This was an extremely exciting partnership for me. I mean, okay, testing unreleased product is always like a little exhilarating, but it also pushed me to get out there and shoot a bunch and get really comfortable with this camera really fast. FedEx had a problem getting these rolls to me, and so by the time I got them, I only had like a month and a half to get through 7 rolls of the 120. I made it through 5, and of course, I wanted to create really high quality images and make Harman proud, let them know that they made a good decision by sending these things to me. So I really had to put the work in to get comfortable with this camera, take it out as much as possible, and stop being so precious with each individual photo. So now I am very comfortable shooting with this, and I'm absolutely thrilled by the results that I got. In this video, I'm going to talk briefly about the specs of the film, what Phoenix is all about, etc., and then I'll discuss my experience shooting with it. I tested it in a wide range of settings and lighting conditions, and so I'll share my observations about what works, what doesn't, and what you can expect in different circumstances. Finally, I will briefly compare the 120 version with the 35mm, so you can see how the 120 performs compared to its slimmer counterpart. I'll show you my example photos throughout this video, both edited and unedited, and I'll compare the scans I got back from the lab with the scans that I made myself. If this all sounds interesting to you, stick around. If you like this video, don't forget to leave a like, and you can also click the share button. I don't even think you have to share it. I think you just have to click the share button and copy the URL, and that gives me YouTube points. So consider doing that for some extra bonus channel support action. And of course, you can subscribe to my channel for more photography related content almost every week. So with all of that said, and without further ado, let's jump right in and talk about specs. So, I actually already talked about the specs of Harman Phoenix in my initial review of the product earlier this year, maybe late last year. So go and check out that video for further reading. I'll summarize it a little bit here. Harman Phoenix is an experimental, limited edition C41 color film. It is the first color film manufactured by this incarnation of Harman Photo and represents a very important milestone in the resurgence of film photography. We've seen so many iconic film stocks be discontinued over the last decade. Seeing a new one hit the market that isn't manufactured by Kodak is pretty exciting. Harman Phoenix is characterized by vibrant reds, high contrast, visible grain structure, bright halation, and a narrow exposure latitude. The film is labeled limited edition, and while the film itself is here to stay, I hope, the emulsion in its current form is still being tweaked and experimented with as the manufacturers get feedback from consumers and iterate on their results. At one point, the manufacturers expressed hesitation as to whether or not consumers would enjoy the red halation, and if I recall correctly, mentioned it as a trait that might be on the chopping block. Halation is a slight red tinge that appears surrounding areas of bright light, and I threatened to riot if they got rid of it. So I'm very pleased to announce that in the 120 version, the halation is still very much intact. This makes me very happy. Since halation tends to be less noticeable when the frame is larger, I was worried that by accepting the benefits of medium format photography, I would be saying goodbye to the aesthetic tones and vibes of halation. But that was not the case. And as you can see, we get a really lovely halation effect even in the larger frame. Now, Harman has a set of recommended scan settings to use for best results. This is because the film does not have the orange mask that many Kodak stocks have. As you can see, it's quite blue, in fact. So the colors can get a bit wacky if it's treated like a Kodak stock in post. If you don't abide by the recommended settings, the photos will look a bit orangey. They have more of a vintage vibe. And I have my own feelings about the recommended scanner settings, and I will get to that in the next section, so put a pin in it for now. I just wanted to mention the scanner settings here and the color of the base because I believe these count as specs. Phoenix has a box speed of 200 ISO. Now, last time I talked about Phoenix, I said it would probably be a better idea to pull it than to push it. And I was right. In fact, I have recently discovered that the absolute best way to shoot Harman Phoenix, write this down, is to meter it at 125 ISO. You want to overexpose it slightly. Meter at 125, develop at 200. That's how I got my best results. Here are some pictures from a roll of 35mm Harman Phoenix that I shot this way, and honestly, this is one of my favorite rolls of film that I shot this year. Can you blame me? They're great. It does not look super contrasty or lomographic. To me, it just looks like a nice, chill film stock with some funky colors. This film is known for being quite rough when underexposed, and every criticism I've read about it online is related to that narrow exposure latitude. But you can fix this by shooting it at 125. Tell your friends, spread the word. This is the best way to shoot it. That said, I do not have a light meter for my Yashica. Does it bother you that I pronounce it Yashica? Do you wish that I pronounced it Yashica? I don't have a light meter for my Yashica, so for some of these, I was just guessing at the proper settings. For the shots that I took side by side with my 35mm camera, I was able to copy the settings over from that because it does have a light meter, and that was metered at 120, not 200. But for the majority of the 120 shots, I was relying on pure skill and talent. So I did get a few underexposed frames here and there, but honestly not bad, considering I was just eyeballing it most of the time. Please clap. I also got a bunch of overexposed frames, but it was really easy to correct those in post. Like, really easy, and they wound up looking really good. So erring on the side of overexposure is definitely the right move, in my opinion. I am getting a bit off the topic of specs here now and veering into talking about my experience, so let's make it official. Roll title card. So, the entire rest of that clip was out of focus, which was very sad because my hair was so good yesterday, but here I am the next day ready to re-record. I look a bit different. Don't talk about it. Instead, let's talk about my experience. Okay, so I shot this film in every conceivable environment, except for nighttime street photography. And that is because this taps out at f3.5, and with a 200 ISO film at f3.5, I'm not a tripod person, okay? But I did shoot it in studio with LED panels to kind of simulate nighttime conditions, and I also shot it indoors in natural light. I shot it outdoors in overcast light, direct sun, sunrise, sunset, front light, back light, and I have example photos for each one. Don't look at the blue splotches on these ones. That's not part of the film, that is my fault. The DSLR scanning process that I jerry-rigged is not perfect. It's not really scanning either, to be honest. I don't have a scanning setup for 120 yet. I'm gonna get one. This is my first foray into 120, okay? I don't have all the materials that I need. So I figured something out. And I honestly feel like this is kind of brilliant. By the last roll, I was getting pretty clean looking scans. Like, look at this is pretty clean. But some of the early ones do have smudges and things that represent reflections, and don't worry about it, okay? For all of these little slides that I made, the DSLR scan of the 120 refers to this, if you're wondering why some of them look kind of bad. The 35mm shots, on the other hand, were taken properly with this thing, so if you see DSLR 35mm, just know that those scans are proper. The lab scans were presumably taken on a proper scanner using the scan settings recommended by the manufacturer. So, let's talk about those recommended settings. I'm suspicious. I don't think I like them. Maybe I do. I have thoughts. I always thought of Harman Phoenix as being a high contrast film characterized by dense black tones and shadows. But here are some of the 35mm shots that I scanned myself, and I'm not really seeing that high contrast look. Here are some of my 120 shots, and again, not so high contrasty. Vintage looking, sure, but I wouldn't describe this as being characterized by contrast. If you had tried to tell me that these were taken on Harman Phoenix, I might not have believed you. But look, here's the negative. It's Phoenix, all right. Now, I do like the contrast in a bunch of these lab versions. In many cases, I prefer the lab scans, but it's nice to know that we have options, right? For example, the shots that require a fairly high dynamic range don't look great with the high contrast settings. And I was glad that I was able to recover a bit of that detail by scanning them myself. These 35mm shots that I scanned myself turned out perfectly. It has a painterly quality, a light dusting of color, gentle halation, and the grain isn't quite as visible either. It actually blew me away that these were taken on the same film stock that I reviewed earlier in the year. Overall, I prefer the recommended scan settings for super bright scenes, city shots, and scenes with unusual lighting. But I prefer my scans for the backlit shots, overcast days, and images that require a higher dynamic range to look their best. I know I have to invest in a proper DSLR scan setup for 120, and if anyone has any really affordable recommendations for that, please let me know in the comments below. I would like to get that as soon as possible because a lot of these photos deserve better scans than the ones they got. Moving on, I would like to talk about portraits. I see a lot of criticism online about how Harman Phoenix renders skin tones. I shot my first rolls of Phoenix back in December, but I mostly photographed natural scenery and crazy lighting setups, so there weren't actually many examples of regular portraits for me to examine. But this time, I made the same mistake again. I got through my first 4 rolls of this without taking a single picture of a person. And about 4 days ago, I realized this and I was like, oh no! So I booked a shoot to get out and rectify the situation. So here you go, here's your portraits. And wow, look at that charming devil. As you can see, the skin tones in these are not remarkable, but they're not remarkably bad either, right? Like, I wouldn't caution someone away from shooting portraits with this film. In natural light, I think they look pretty good. It's definitely got a vintage vibe, but like, that's a look, right? And I kind of like that look. A lot of these came out overexposed, but that was my fault because I was eyeballing the exposure, and it's hard to tell how bright a scene is when it's overcast out. Don't tell me to get a light meter. I don't want one, I like eyeballing it. I only took 3 shots in studio because I wasn't confident in the amount of light available. The Yashica taps out at f3.5, and metering this film at 125 ISO with 3 dinky LED panels, it's not a recipe for a particularly well-lit photo. Nevertheless, I did try some funky stuff, and I can confirm that the vibrant red tones are well intact on this film. In my initial review of Phoenix, the red tones were what really stuck out to me. I've since realized that they're not as crazy when this film is slightly overexposed. That's a trade-off I'm happy to make, but in all of my underexposed shots, they did really pop. I think the red tones are also really complemented by the red halation. So for these studio portraits, I leaned into a red color palette and got some really fun results. And it also works for yellow and orange tones, bringing them out and giving them this fiery, saturated look. Combined with the high contrast of the scan settings, this looks really cool. There's also another effect going on in these photos that I would like to talk about briefly. When you shoot a dark scene with a single, isolated, bright area of light, ideally sunlight, the funky color palette, bright halation, and high contrast look really help to augment the scene. This is a pretty typical compositional device used by street photographers. You'll see us do it all the time, where we isolate the silhouette of a subject in a beam of light down an alleyway or something, and it works really well on Phoenix. I wish that I had gotten more high-quality street photography on this because I can imagine some really great shots with this setup. So keep that in mind when you shoot your first roll. Finally, before I close out this video, let's look at how Harman Phoenix 120 compares to its 35mm counterpart. Obviously, the grain is slightly finer on the 120, but still fairly noticeable. It's a lot more noticeable than you might expect, and if you compare the two side by side, you can really tell. Likewise, the halation is stronger on the 35mm, and this side by side I think has the most noticeable comparison. I wish that I had better 120 scans to show you because mine all look a lot bluer than the 35mm, but I suspect that that is my fault and not actually due to a difference in the film. I have recently learned that the thickness of the plastic base can account for some differences in color, but comparing the 35mm with the 120, they look and feel pretty much identical. I can't detect a difference in thickness here. So, in conclusion, I have shot a lot of Harman Phoenix over the last month and a half. I shot 3 rolls of the 35mm and 5 rolls of the 120, and I even shot a roll on my half-frame camera, so I have Phoenix photos in all shapes and sizes. When I initially shot this film last winter, my conclusion was that it was a fun, lomographic novelty film, and until this month, I had left it at that. But shooting with Phoenix 120 in the summer really opened my eyes to the possibilities, and I realized what this film is actually capable of. Perhaps my first impression of Phoenix was muted by the fact that it came out in December, and so my initial photos with it were all of dull, wintry scenery. Seeing how this film performs in bright sunlight in summer really changed my perception of it. Harman has this Summer of Phoenix campaign going on right now, and I see why, because this film was made for summer. So if it's still warm and sunny in your part of the world, do consider picking up a roll of the 120 and experiencing the glory of its fiery red halation firsthand. And of course, you can do that through my affiliate link for Freestyle Photo LA down in the description below. When you buy film or anything through that link, I get money. And that's great, because videos like this take a lot of time and effort to put together, and a little financial support goes a long way. Another way that you can support the channel is by buying me a coffee. There's another link down below for that, and that is a one-time $5 donation. All proceeds from that link go directly towards improving the quality of the content that I'm able to offer here on this channel. So a huge thank you to anyone who considers that. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. I would also love to give a huge thank you to Harman for sending me so much film, for trusting me with an unreleased product, and for inspiring me to try out medium format for the first time. Like I said, this was a very exciting partnership, and yeah, I really appreciate that I'm on their radar. I'll see you all soon with another video. It won't be next week because your girl is going to New York Fashion Week. I'm gonna be doing some New York themed content later in September. I've got some film to try out, I've got some developer to try out, some exciting stuff there, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, I want you all to stay sharp and don't forget to keep shooting. Bye guys.